Welcome to Talent Matters, the podcast where talent, skills, and determination take centre stage. I'm your host, Donal O'Donoghue, and each episode we dive into the world of applying talent in various aspects of life. Whether it's careers, sport, or creative, Talent Matters explores how the right mix of talent, skills, and grit can propel us towards our goals. Join us as we uncover stories, insights, and strategies from our guests who have tapped into their talents to create remarkable achievements. This podcast is brought to you by Sanderson, a leader in global talent solutions. Damian Browne is an extreme adventurer and international keynote speaker. He's a former professional rugby player who played for Connacht, Northampton Saints, Brive, and Leinster. He has undertaken some incredible challenges, including rowing solo and unsupported across the Atlantic Ocean, climbing 5 of the 7 summits, and running a 257-kilometre ultra-marathon across the Sahara Desert. Let's get into it. Good to see you. Thanks for coming in. Thanks for doing this.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Yeah, so I was telling you there before we got started that the whole idea for this podcast is all about examining the relationship between talent and skills and grit. And as soon as that idea came up, the first name on the wish list when it comes to talent, skills and grit was Damian Browne. I suppose just for people that mightn't have come across you before, I can safely say you're the only person I know that's ran across the Sahara and rode across the Atlantic and stuff. So before we get into some of the outlandish stuff that you've done with your life, can we go back to the early days? Because, you know, talent emerges in childhood. So what were you good at? What were you into when you were, if you go back to primary school age or when you're a small kid, what were your talents? What did you gravitate towards?
Sport generally, and 2 particular sports, rugby as a kind of 11, 12-year-old, a kind of consequence of environment. So a lot of the kids in my neighbourhood were kind of walking up the 10-minute walk up to Goejan's RFC from our little community. So, you know, seeing the older kids that you look up to, like at that point 14-year-olds, 15-year-olds, you know, and them throwing the gear bag over the shoulder and all walking up together on a Saturday morning at like 10 o'clock. So that was something that I wanted to emulate, I suppose. And that first day in Goejan's, I remember vividly, like I remember that first training session, and I could take you to the spot where I knew this sport was for me. It was on the rugby pitch. I could bring you there right now. That's how I remember it so kind of clearly. And I committed fully to a tackle. So there was a guy running, a young, you know, obviously 11, 12-year-olds, it was under 12s, running past me with the ball, and I remember this kind of literal leap of faith, right? Leaving the ground and committing fully to a tackle and kind of wrapping my arms, and then him continuing to run and sliding down his body. And as I slid down his body, his trailing boot came up and, you know, bashed into the underside of my jaw and just did this reverberation through my nervous system. And that was the moment. Like, it was just this communication to me, you know, you've found your sport.
That's mad. I had the opposite experience because the first tackle at under 12s I went to make, I just got ran over. That's
so no, rugby was kind of from that moment. It was my sport, but it was actually played second fiddle to most of my kind of teenage years to actual golf. Would you believe?
Oh,
yeah. My dad was a big golfer, and it was how we spent a lot of time together. You know, he was a member of golf club outside Galway called Ugderard, and he, I suppose, during, you know, childhood, I was pushed to him, and you take him golfing. If you're going golfing, we'll take the young fella, because I was the oldest, right? So I got really into golf and loved it. And he actually ended up opening a driving range in Galway at one point. So every summer I was working in the driving range, you know, and just hitting balls and kind of building that obsession with the game. But it came to this period then later in my teens, like 15, 16, where rugby started to surpass it in how I looked at it and how I enjoyed it, and kind of golf became, I suppose, second fiddle to rugby, and all my energy went into training and playing games, really.
But then I remember when we talked in the past, you talked about a time where you kind of got out of shape when you were in secondary school.
Yeah, that was kind of pushing into, so, I was always big. I had a, I think
How tall are you, by the way? 'Cause
I'm 6'5".
you make the rest of us feel very short. You're 6'5".
6'5", but I've been 6'5" since I was kind of 16. Had a big growth spurt, I think, between like junior cert, so and then into fifth year, I came back and I was always tall, but I'd like gone like head and shoulders above everyone else. Like there's pictures of me in the rugby team, and the way the heads are all kind of the same, and then it kind of goes like this and then back along. So I had that big growth spurt, so I was always big, but then my lifestyle was really poor. Like I just had a really bad diet, and there was some issues at home, and I suppose I was emotionally avoiding them and just trying to cope, like, so that was my outlet, right? And if I'm being honest, still to this day, like if I ever find myself kind of emotionally down, like I'll see myself overeating, like it all comes from that period.
I've been there.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I think a lot of people probably relate to that. So yeah, so I got to a point when I was like 17 where I was heavily overweight and very unfit, and I still had this love for the game and obsession, but I just wasn't I wasn't fit to play, like, so I wasn't getting selected. And I came off a school's rugby season in the Bish, like kind of March time, and I hadn't been selected for a game. And when it meant so much to you, like it hurt me, when the penny dropped, that you love this game, you're obsessed with it, but you're not getting picked. You're not, you're disappointing yourself. You're underperforming. You're not living up to any potential.
It's hard to believe that you can be in secondary school 6'5" and not get
Yeah,
picked, so.
no, it was a waste of space, really. So at least in terms of performing and contributing to a team. So I didn't deserve to be picked, and it was the right thing to do for the coaches. But I didn't see that until that moment. It was the pain of the picture that I then saw, that made me make a decision that like literally changed the course of my life. So, and that decision was on a very shallow level, or sorry, at least a shallow level of view, was to get fit. But really what the decision was to take responsibility for one thing within my life, one thing that was within my control. And the question I asked myself was like, well, what are you going to do about it? I think I was just sick of like waiting, sick of waiting for somebody else to do something for me. And I was able to make that decision to start to get fit, and of course more than just the decision. Then I put in the actions of just walking up to Go Regions again and just running laps, because that's all I knew. And like the first night was, I lasted 2.5 laps. But I came back the next night and the next night and the next night, and started to build a bit of momentum, started to see myself running a bit further, started to feel different about myself, and those things are very what responsibility gives you is control, and control is a very addictive thing, so I was, the momentum and the rewards of the decision, and then the work, and then what that gave me, the control, was easily, I suppose, latched onto and continued, even though every day, of course, was difficult. Every step of those laps was difficult because of my size and my lack of capacities, but I was able to kind of leverage that momentum. I was starting to feel better about myself, started to feel right, and started to get fit, and my rugby started to improve dramatically. So, I put in 30 nights straight on that pitch, and, I continued training during that summer. That was like kind of April time at the end of the season. And when I got back into school the next year, all of a sudden I was a hugely valuable person in the team because I was 6'5" and like 19 stone playing schoolboys rugby, and I moved back to number 8. I was picking the ball off the back of the scrum, and I was just scoring tries. Like I was basically like I wasn't unstoppable, but like they found it hard to stop me because I was aggressive as well. I had an aggression within me. People start looking up to you then, and that feels good. I think that feels very good for the male, you know, when you are in a position where people are reliant on you, and you were playing a role in I suppose leading the team in that case. So all of those things just led to this connection between the action of doing something, so taking responsibility and committing to getting fit, and then doing the work and persevering through the work, and then the rewards of that. And the next year came out of school and I was straight into professional rugby. So it's not like it is now where you know, the depth in professional squads is huge, and you're never going to come from schools, at least as a second row, into playing senior professional rugby. But back then the game was professional 3 years, so there might have only been 3 or 4 senior second rows, and I suppose they just saw this big lump of a young fella. And they were like, well, just throw him in and see if he sinks or swim, you know. And thankfully I was able to swim in those, you know, I took the opportunity, and I had the raw materials to contribute at that early stage. And that led to this, you know, 16-year career in professional rugby.
And you know, a lot of what you've talked about in the past and what we've discussed in the past is that kind of connection between physical endeavor and what that does for your, I suppose, psychologically, what that does for your mindset. So if you were to take that 16-year rugby career and kind of distill it down to what rugby gave you or equipped you with, what do you, when you think back on it?
It's an extraordinarily challenging environment, so that the pressures are from every angle. So you have the internal pressures that you put on yourself to perform and be better and get better. You have the external pressures of everyone. You're continually and constantly judged and prodded and poked, you know, from the strength and conditioning staff. They're all pressurizing you to get leaner, better body composition, stronger, better conditioning, faster. So there's all sorts of metrics that you are continually working towards, even in the strength and conditioning. Then you have the coaching and the technical side of it. And you have your individual or your positional coaches who are trying to make you a better scrummager, a better line-out forward, a better better at the ruck, better in the maul, better around the field, better ball carrier, better tackler. So you're constantly being analysed not even every week, but every day there. And then you have the pressures of performing week in, week out, and the pressures from fans, even though that wasn't a really big one for me, but it exists, right? Pressure from media. You have, it's a career, financial pressures. You're trying to make the most out of it. So it helps you. What it did more than anything is it gives you the tools to deal with pressure and understand the psychology around dealing with those pressures, and the way it's often the way we learn best is through failing to deal with things, you know. So I had plenty of failures along that way of dealing with those pressures, but if you stay alive enough in the fight, you keep picking yourself up when you're knocked down, you'll figure out a way to deal with those pressures. Of course, you have to analyze where you go wrong along the way, the mistakes you make, but you know, you'll figure that out long enough if you stay alive in the fight.
And you played professional rugby in Ireland, in England, and France. Where were you happiest in terms of, when you think about the setup, the team, the culture? What did you enjoy the most in terms of an environment to be in?
The environment of Leinster. When I arrived at Leinster, so I have been probably a pro at that point for 11 years, and it was like a relief that I finally found an environment where I felt that my mentality and my work ethic, it matched what was there already, and in some cases was maybe a step or two below the standards what were demanded of the players there. So they just had this extraordinary empowering culture, where they pushed a lot of the pressure back onto the player to perform, and demanded a lot in terms of the strength and conditioning side of it. So I always had a massive affection and obsession with my physical state and improving that. Ever since that 17-year-old started running laps, I understood the power that was within improving your physical and therefore mental capacity. So I took a huge responsibility for that in the other clubs I was in, meaning that like I would just go to the gym and train on my own because I didn't feel like I was getting enough out of what they were demanding. But when I got to Leinster, I was like, everybody here is on that same level. Like everybody here is pushing. The environment, the coaches, the rehabilitation specialists, they're all pushing for the same standards as I demand of myself. So that was just such a relief and such a joy to experience, and pleasure over the 2 seasons I was here. And then we had great coaches. Obviously, Joe Smith, I have great admiration for him, and he was an extraordinary coach, and he set up great environment. And we had a guy called John O'Gibbs, who was an ex-New Zealand, an All Black second row / back row, and he was somebody I really admired and got on very well with, and he enjoyed the way I played. But so yeah, that was definitely the environment. Ironically, the Celtic League, or the Pro 12 as it was called then, which is now the URC, is the league that suited me least, suited my style of play. Like, so I was a big, heavy second row. So that the slower leagues, the more pressurized leagues in terms of like promotion, relegation, or success in relegation, like the top 14 and the Premiership, and they're more combative, and they're more confronting in their style of play. More of the game is played around the ruck. So that suited me way more. I would much rather you run straight at me than you try and run around me, Whereas the URC, or the Pro 12 at that point, and particularly the way Leinster played, was it wasn't ideal for my strengths. But what they really needed was a big, heavy second row, So they needed it for the scrum, they needed it for their maul defense. So I fitted into that hole that they had in their squad, but I really didn't fit their style of play, and I didn't fit the style of play of the URC. So I probably preferred the other leagues. Like, I love the Premiership. Is a tough league. Like, the Premiership is the league where there's no easy game. Home and away, 26 games a year, or I think it was 24 games a year at that point. Every game is hard, every game is attritional, every game is physical. The French league is the league you'll get the hardest match you'll ever play, because they're so emotional. So you'll play a team someday that are extraordinarily up for the game. Like, we played a couple of home games when I was at Brive against Toulouse, and they are obviously a great team, but sometimes they don't turn up because they're so flaky emotionally. But the day they do turn up, they fly into things like nobody else, So you'll have the toughest game you'll ever have in the top 14. You'll also have the easiest game. 8 minutes into a game, you will know that the opposition haven't got off the bus. Like, they don't want to be there. Like, there's many home games I can remember playing against, like Stade Francais, Perpignan, Bayonne, where they've no interest. They're like, they haven't come to lose, but they almost know they're going to lose, and they don't get off the bus. And that's just comes down to that emotional, the lack of. Well, firstly, it comes down to many things. It comes down to the culture. It comes down to the coaching. It comes down to how they've prepared that week emotionally. And a lot of the French coaching is very old school. So the coaches use a lot of emotional blackmail against the players. The amount of times we'd be preparing for a game and we'd be doing a scrum session, I have this old school coach, and he'd be like, Perpignan, they're the best scrum in the league. If we're not on top of it, they're going to fuck us up, right? Next week, right? Clermont, they're the best scrum in the league. If we don't prepare properly, they're going to fuck us up. 3 weeks later, Toulon, they're the best. You said this 3 weeks in a row, like they're not the best scrum, and not everyone. So it's just, they treat you like children, like, so they don't prepare particularly well. They don't hit the right notes during the week to prepare the players. So you can just, sometimes teams don't get off buses, and particularly for away games. So those are the two leagues that I probably enjoyed the most rather than the top 14. But the environment I enjoyed most was undoubtedly playing here in Dublin with Leinster.
Yeah. And then that whole transition from professional sport to life after, that can be a real challenge for some athletes. So talk to us about that, for how you approached it.
I had this awareness for a number of years that, and this was it. The awareness was that I'm not just a rugby player. I'd learned to detach my identity from being a rugby player, and I couldn't say that throughout my career. Of course, like the early days, I would have more attached my identity. It was a shield from the continued questioning, like, of what are you going to do with your life? Well, I'm a rugby player, like I'm a professional rugby player, right? So that gives you like I said, a kind of a respect, I suppose, in terms of the question. But like, as years went by, I realized, of course, you're so much more than that. You're not that. You're Damian. Like, so by the end of it, because I'd lasted so long in it, and it's such a challenging environment to spend time in, and you really have to have certain values. I felt I knew myself pretty well, like, and I felt I knew what was important and meaningful to me, and that I felt I had found a path, which was that continually pushing myself physically and mentally in whatever whatever package called me. So as we know, some of those were like running in the Sahara Desert. They were extreme, right? They were memorable. They were achievements I wanted to do. Row across the Atlantic, mountaineering. So that's what I kind of first.
You make it sound like just went down to the shop, ran across the Sahara. So what, the Sahara is like 240, 250k.
Yeah.
So just give us an idea of what that is. What have you to bring with you? How do you? What's it called again?
The Marathon des Sables. Yeah, it's one of the original ultra marathons. So it's kind of going now for 6 years, and it's a really well run event, very slick event in the Moroccan Sahara Desert. And it's, as you said, 250 odd kilometers. Changes, the course changes every year, so you actually don't know what the route is until you get every day. The night before the next stage, you get a route map. So that's the first time you'll know what terrain you're going over that day. But it's classically set up in terms of the first 3 stages are always kind of just below marathon distance, and then the 4th stage is always double marathon, and the 5th stage is always a marathon exact distance, and then there is a 6th stage, but it's very short. So generally what you're going into, but you don't know the specifics of the terrain and the route and the distance, and it's self-supported, so you have to carry everything you need for the whole duration from day one. Apart from water, so they give you water at every checkpoint. So you'd need your bedding, so sleeping bag, sleeping mat, pillow, air pillow. You'll need your cooking utensils and your food. So you bring freeze-dried food, and you just a little setup where you create a burner to boil water, and you add it to the freeze-dried food. So you have all that. You need your clothing for the 6 days. You need any sort of maintenance for your feet. The most vulnerable thing, and the thing that stops most people, is just the sand getting into your trainers, your runners, and the sand, like even the littlest bit of sand will just churn up your feet and create huge blisters, and they are very mentally debilitating. So any sort of feet care, you got to look after them, and then they give you. There's some things you have to bring. They're not like not often used, but things like scorpion bite kits, that sort of stuff, they're also part of the things you're told that you have to have, so they'll go through a checklist, they'll go through your bag and all that. So
What kind of temperatures are you running in?
I think our year, the highest was like 45, 46 degrees. It's in April, so it's kind of not at the height of summer, but for good reason, right? But it's still, and that wouldn't have been a particularly extreme year. I've heard stories of it getting to over 50, for it. So, yeah, you just got to make sure firstly have some conditioning to the sun, and then secondly, keep your skin as covered as possible, because clearly that was a big problem if you don't.
And then I suppose you touched on rowing the Atlantic, so I think that's the first time that you came onto my radar. I was saying to you, I woke up one morning and I got a Facebook alert, and I just saw this madman in the middle of despair after losing your spoon or something like that.
Oh yeah,
halfway across the Atlantic, and I just thought, what is going on? But actually, what was really compelling about it was the conversations and the confronting challenges and emotions and so on. So maybe can you set the context a little bit with that 2022 New York, leaving New York and heading towards Galway?
So I had this was my second ocean rowing expedition. So I had some experience with I'd spent 63 days on the southern route, which was from the other direction, from east to west, from the Canary Islands to the Caribbean, and it was an amazing experience, and it was everything I wanted in terms of that and the challenge and the memories. But something had come on my radar at the very end of that. Was I knew I'd do another ocean row at that point, so the thing was, like, it always has to be I'm not interested in going over old ground. I'm not interested in repeating the challenge of an experience that I know I can achieve. I want to push myself, right? So I'm looking for something that's more challenging. So this west to east, New York to Galway route came on my radar, and it kind of came on my radar because I knew somebody else who had kind of planned to do it, but they had to pull out because of injury. And it came on my radar because when I got to Antigua, which was the little island in the Caribbean that I landed on in my first ocean row, there had been a boat of 4 Antiguan men who had arrived about a month before me. And they were still a reverberation throughout the country about what they had done. Like, everyone was still talking about them, because I had shared my journey, and some people had picked up on it in Antigua, so they knew who I was, and they'd come talking to me in the supermarkets and on the street, and then they'd say, and what about the 4 lads, and they'd name them off, Eli and the lads, and I'd be like, I just thought this was an amazing thing that they had such an effect on the general population just by rowing the ocean. So then I started thinking about, geez, I could actually row into Galway, and I started to create some meaning behind not only challenging myself, which is first and foremost, and what I'm going to get from the experience, which is first and foremost the foundation of a meaningful endeavor, but then what are other people going to get from it? And I thought about, what if I was a young fella standing on the docks in Galway or on Nemo's Pier and seeing somebody having rowed into the Atlantic in this tiny little boat, actually seeing that image, of this somebody who's weather beaten, but kind of has faced extraordinary challenges but persevered. I was like, what would that give me as a 17-year-old, if I saw that? So I started to build a lot of meaning out into the vision of what this was and why it would be important for me to try and do it. And that just, I kept adding on kind of little bits to it, Okay, so we're leaving from New York. So the very first ocean row was left from New York 125 years ago. So there's a bit of historical connection. There's the connection between Ireland and New York and the coffin ships and the people going to Ellis Island, and we'll be passing by that. So, it started to kind of fill out the picture and the vision I had. So I was very, as that happened, it got more meaningful to me, and my energy reserves, I suppose, increased in terms of making this thing happen. And so and what makes that route so difficult is, and the reason why it's been attempted like 90 times and only 40% of the boats have successfully crossed to Europe. The reason why those stats are so low is because the weather systems on the North Atlantic are highly adversarial to rowing a boat, meaning that, so my first ocean row went from, as I mentioned, the Canary Islands to Antigua. You go across a trade winds route. So basically, there's this band of wind that is consistently blowing that east to west direction. Now, it might blow you north-northeast or north-northwest or south-southwest, but at least you're going west. So if I'm not rowing, that boat is probably going west, probably going where I want it to go in some capacity, right? On the North Atlantic, there's no trade winds. There's all these little microclimates. So, you can wake up at 6 a.m. and the wind is going north, and by 12 p.m. it's going west, and by the end of the day it's going south. It's really inconsistent, meaning that, when I'm not rowing, the chances of the boat going where I wanted to go are very, very slim. In fact, they'd probably go where I don't want it to go, backwards. As it turned out, I went backwards a lot. It's a 3,000 mile ocean row, and we calculated that I rowed roughly around 3,700 miles, because I went backwards about 400 nautical miles over the course of the expedition, 112 days. So that's, dealing with going backwards for periods of, say, 2 or 3 days is very hard. When you're going backwards every time you stop rowing for 60 days, it's absolutely soul destroying. Like, it's, we touched on, there's deep moments of despair and disillusionment and disparagement. It just sucks the life out of you. You can't build any momentum to continue, to any positive momentum. You can't leverage anything. Like, there's no, oh, well, I got, I had a good day today because I made like 50 or 60 miles. Like, it's always fighting. You're fighting for inches. You're fighting for miles. And it's just very hard to stay neutral or stay positive, because there's so much resistance in you achieving what you want to achieve.
And the schedule, when you're into it, how many hours per day rowing, and then time off? Talk to us a little bit about the cabin conditions.
So not unusually, but I actually started that expedition with a friend of mine. It was meant to be a pair's endeavor, and it was a good friend. We knew each other for years, and he was medically evacuated on day 12 from the expedition because of he had his own amazing story, where he was actually paralyzed from the belly button down in a workplace accident about 5 years before we started this, and he was given a prognosis to, at best, you have a 5% chance of recovering any sensation below your belly button. And he had this amazing journey where he confounded all those prognoses and regained sensation and regained mobility and relearned to walk. But what we didn't see, I suppose, in the preparation was that the effects of an ocean row, that would have on somebody who's gone through this. Because I felt like this is a guy I can rely on. I saw values within his behavior that I knew we would need on the ocean. And he's a good friend, and I wanted to do more stuff with friends in this, create memories with friends of doing extraordinary things. So that's why I asked him. But what we didn't see, I suppose, is just the difficulty of an ocean row, the challenge of it, and the effects that would have on where he was coming from, his medical history. So it all ended up on day 12 or 12 that he was feeling utterly exhausted, and he measured his O2 saturation levels, and they were 86, and they should be like 99 or 100 at sea level. And then he said, listen, his exact words were, I don't mean to alarm you, but my O2 sats are 86. And I was like, oh, that, from doing quite a bit of mountaineering, I knew that, that's not right, and that means big trouble. And then he said, like, when I had my surgery in the Mater private, or the Mater spinal unit, one of the indicators for blood clotting in my lungs post spinal surgery is drop in O2 sats. So then Scary. I heard that, he's gone. This is it. There's too much risk to continue. You'd be mad to continue. So we had this whole medical evacuation. So to that point, to answer your question, we had been rowing in 90-minute shifts on and off for 24 hours a day, non-stop, because we were pushing. We hoped to break the world record together for a pairs crossing, which was 55 days, 13 hours. And then when he was medically evacuated, it was basically down to, well, how much can I row a day sustainably? And that looked at about 11 or 12 hours a day. I found it very difficult. There was some days I didn't.
How did you measure that, or how did you? Because you had to make this decision unexpectedly on the fly. So how did you calculate that?
Basically, just off the history of doing the previous ocean row as a solo, I knew that 12 hours a day it's hard work. It's really hard work. It's hard to stay on the oars for 12 hours a day, and to my standards. So of course I was rowing 12 hours a day at that point with him, but he was doing the other 12 hours. So that's I just fell on, like, it was kind of the clear marker that I would give myself. Now, it was tough. Like it is. I read about some people who say they row 14, 15 hours. I don't know how they do it, because it's a real battle to stay on for 12 hours. Just to do that to your standards for 12 hours is very draining, but that's what I set myself. And then the rest of the day is just made up about resting, and there's all sorts of maintenance that needs to be kept on top of on the boat.
How do you manage your productivity in terms of your kind of capability? Because obviously you can't row 11 hours a day flat out. How do you manage your energy reserves? Do you have to break it down?
Yeah, so try to make the most of the daylight. So that would mean the kind of routine I fell into was a 3 a.m. Alarm call, and then 45 minutes to an hour to be on the oars. So on the oars for 4 would mean I would have probably an hour roughly of darkness of rowing to get into the day, and then just try and make the most of the day after that. So I break it down into like either 90-minute blocks or 2-hour blocks, and then an hour off here and there. And I tried to fit that 12 hours into before it got dark, and that would mean 2 things. I would get a block of sleep at night that was regenerative and restorative, like, so maybe get 4 to 5 hours of sleep instead of like trying to row through the night, because rowing through the night it's just hell. Like there's speaking of productivity, it's incredibly inefficient, because you need to be able to see what the ocean is doing, so where you place your oars. And on this route, there's a lot of cloud cover. So firstly, there's the periods when there's no moon, so it's like pitch black. And secondly, there's a lot of cloud cover. So even when there is moon, you're not getting much moonlight. So you can't see what the ocean is doing, particularly. Like, I wouldn't be able to see much further than past you, And I need to read those waves so I can place the oars in a certain position to get the best stroke I can, because that's going to compound and add up and it's going to get me there faster. So what happens is, you miss time 19 out of 20 oar strokes when it's dark, and that means that, you get some sort of ricochet, like the oar will end up in your quad or sometimes in your shin, or the worst one was the end of the oar into the ribs, like, and when your bed is just there, like it's literally looking at you, out the cabin. So, when things going like that, and you're like, this is a waste of fucking time. So I tried to get 4 or 5 hours sleep at night and then just make the most of the daylight and just stay disciplined around that.
Talk to us about the accommodation. So for anyone that hasn't seen it, what are the dimensions of
the boat is 6.2 meters in length, and then on either end, it's got 2 cabins and a little cockpit in the middle. And one of those cabins is quite like it's much more bulbous than the other. So that's your living, that's where you live, that's where you sleep, and that's where all your electrics are. That's where your water maker is, that's where your GPS is, that's where your radar is, that's where your VHF radio, that's where you store everything. The other one is just for storage, and you could squeeze in there if absolutely necessary, like in some sort of emergency, but it would be ridiculously uncomfortable. And then all the storage of things like food and general ballast, water ballast, is underneath the deck. So all the deck is compartmentalized into these little hatches that you fill up with food and things you're going to need daily. And it's, and then there's just a vinyl kind of bedding in that main cabin. But it's, to say it's uncomfortable is a exaggeration. It's, so like some examples are like, that's when you come off the oars, say when we were both rowing and I had like 90 minutes to get my skin dry and get some sleep and then get ready to row again in 90 minutes time. So you get at best about 70 minutes of try to get to sleep. It's summer in North America, so we left in June, so it's hot, right, until you get like well up into and later in the year and you well up in the latitudes. So I could be trying to sleep if it's 30 degrees outside in that fiberglass cabin. It could be 42, 43 degrees, and there's you can't have any airflow through there because you get water in there. Like if you have a hatch open or something, the water will fry the electrics basically, and if you fry your GPS or your radio, like that's it, expedition over, right? So you have to have the hatches closed unless it's a really calm day. So there's only a finite amount of air in there, so you'll wake up in a panic, like searching for air, and you'll have to break the hatch of the cabin open. So it's like a sauna with no airflow basically through it, and you have to try and sleep and rest. That's one of the things that kind of caught up with Gussie, because he could not get to sleep. It's very claustrophobic, yeah. No, it's not a nice sensation at all. Like you literally wake up in a panic searching for some air, and then you have to get up and crack that cabin and let some air in and then try and go back to sleep. And he couldn't get any sleep, so he wasn't getting any rest while we were rowing 24 hours a day, and kind of one of the things that caught up with him in the end. But yeah, it's an uncomfortable existence, and there's times where both of us have to be in there, and we're both big men. He was a prop in rugby, so he's not small, I'm not small, and we have to go on a power anchor when the winds are too much to row into them. When we're only making 0.2 or 0.3 or 0.4 of a mile in an hour, there's just no point in continuing to row, and it's highly frustrating and demoralizing. So what you do is you use that opportunity to rest up, and you put out a thing called a power anchor, which is a big parachute that sits under the water, and it holds about 2 tons of water in it, and it stops you getting blown back in those conditions. Now it's not perfect, you'll still go back a little bit, but much less. That means both of us are in the cabin and we're stuck, like you're literally stuck to each other, like, and you're both sweating and there's no air, and yeah,
probably run out of small talk as well.
Oh yeah, no, and the stink, like, and we're top to toe, right? So his feet are in my his feet are in my face, my feet are in his face. So yeah, get a picture of. Yeah.
And talk to us about some of the setbacks, because you had some equipment malfunctions on the way as well that you had to deal with.
Yeah, so on day 24, I had a big tropical storm rolling through, which is like what they call a hurricane in North America. Or so what we call a hurricane, they call it a tropical storm. I had 3 capsizes in the first 5 hours on power anchor. So that's not meant to happen. Power anchor should be keeping me stable and aligned with the wind and the waves. So that was very destabilizing mentally. But I lost on the first capsize the night before when I knew this was coming because I have a weather router who tells me a daily weather forecast for the next 5 days. So for a few days we knew this was coming. So it gets to a point where, you lock down the boat and you tie everything down. And as I was doing that the night before the tropical storm hit me, I had this, so it's called a jet boil, which is, it boils water. So the desalinator makes the water and then you have to boil it to add it to your food. And it's on a gimbal on the boat because it's actually the most dangerous piece of equipment. Because imagine on a pitching and tossing little ocean rowing boat, boiling water. To do that, to mitigate the threat of that, I suppose they put it on this gimbal so it actually flows with the boat. So it's really cool, but the gimbal is quite awkward, and there's no room for anything on the deck, so I was getting in and out, and I kept kind of snagging my shin in the footwell inside the cabin on this gimbal, and I was like, fuck, I'm just going to leave that outside now. And I forgot I left it outside when the storm came, and then I capsized and that was gone. And that was the first jet boil had malfunctioned by day 24, so that was the second one gone. So that meant that I just had to eat cold dehydrated rations for the next, what turned out to be 88 days. And when you tuned in, or when with the spoon thing, I lost my last piece of eating utensils. So we would have started with 4 or 5 sporks, they call them. It's half a fork, half a spoon. And that day I had this huge wave had swamped the cabin, the deck, the cockpit area. And I'd left the spoon down beside me, and other things around the deck. It's quite normal to do that while you're rowing, but what was unusual was because the weight of the water on that flooded the deck, it runs off through these little flaps called scuppers, runs out and back into the ocean, and the amount of volume of water was so heavy that it just picked up the spoon and it just went out through the scupper with the spoon. So that meant that I had to, for the last kind of 18 to 20 days, I had to over liquidize my food. So I had to make it drinkable. That was the only way I could consume it, right? Because I had no spoon. It was either that or my hands. So I had to drink food. So I had to drink cold, dehydrated rations.
What were the? What was
and to make it worse
cold
again,
chicken curry, or what kind of stuff was it?
Yeah, and then to add to that story was, we had a nutrition partner called Radex. They're an amazing company, New Zealand company, and they're world leading in what they do. But it was about 2 or 3 weeks before we signed up as partners with them, and they said to us, oh, by the way, version 8, everything you're going to bring on the ocean, we're gone vegan. Now, I'm not a vegan, right? As you can probably tell, and I'm far from a vegan. But we couldn't afford to not have that partnership, because it would have meant another 8,000 to 10,000 of expenditure on food. So we had to go, okay, great, yeah. So these were cold, dehydrated, vegan rations. So things like falafel. What else? I've actually pushed them out the bottom. I pushed them out of my long-term memory, clearly, from for obvious reasons. But what else had we? Dal, some sort of dal curry. It was highly. It was grim. It was grim.
Yeah. When you think about those times and the confronting, or I think the thing that kind of resonated with me was the fact that you were doing this. You were dealing with this despair and this challenge and looking at head on, but then at the same time, through, I guess, a satellite phone, you're uploading this and sharing this on social media. Was that cathartic, or was that because being alone out there, but still being connected to people.
Yeah.
Were you conscious of that, or what was the thinking?
The part of it that was cathartic was the venting. You know, it was a you're in your own head for day after day through a difficulty, right? Through a struggle, through something you're trying to achieve at the same time. So it's not as if it's, you know, it's not all negative. You're working towards something important, but it's very difficult. And, you know, you got to deal with the internal narrative. And that can, when you're living in states of frustration and agitation on a default level, just trying to move this boat forward, never mind going into, you know, the dispiritment and the disillusionment of it all and down into the despair. Sometimes you need to get that stuff out to some extent, you know, because it'll just build up it'll just fester and bubble and it's going to explode at some point, right? So that's what I found is really helpful in terms of the sharing of the experience, is just grabbing the phone and, like, in terms of so I did a podcast as I went and just talking into the phone and releasing some of that, the story and the narrative and the what's going on inside me every day. So that was really helpful. But the actual act of sharing it is the process of sharing it is actually quite difficult. Well, it adds another challenge to the challenge, like, because you gotta bring a broadband satellite uplink. So it's this little unit. It's about, you know, whatever, 50 centimeters by 50 centimeters, and it's it's heavy, and you got to stand outside, and it has to be in alignment with a satellite, and you got to hold it on the satellite. So you're kind of, and you know that by its beeping, it beeps, beep, 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 and then you log into the satellite, and you attach your phone to it, and you send it. But, like, you send it through the, you know, the whole, through WhatsApp, actually, via the satellite. But a 1 minute or a 2 minute video can take like 30 to and sometimes an hour to send, you know, and you have to keep that thing aligned with the satellite, and it breaks connection, and you have to start again. And, you know, every cell inside me just wants to sleep, really. And I you know, but there's something, right, compelling or driving me to share the journey. And I think it's an opportunity. I think what that is, or I know what that is the opportunity to for somebody else watching to take something positive from what I'm doing, you know, to have a positive effect on somebody. You just, you know, and that's the power, at least that's the opportunity with social media, is that we can do that now. You can get into somebody's pocket and into their lives, and you can affect them positively through what you're doing, what you love, and how you're living your life. And that's the driver for that share. That's the driver that keeps you up at 1 o'clock in the morning out on deck, getting soaked by waves, hanging on with one hand, you know, and the WhatsApp thing dropping out, and you're, for fuck's sake, you just want to get it sent and then get to sleep. But it's an important part of it for me, you know. I just feel it's an amazing opportunity to share a way of living and doing and being that is very it's like a mirror of life, a mirror on the experience of life. Like an ocean row is like it's like a lifetime of challenges, and a lifetime of emotional challenges condensed into however long it takes you. And if I can share how I'm overcoming those, or at least dealing with them, maybe somebody can take that and, you know, use it in their life, and I think that's a great thing to do while you're living your life to the best of your ability.
And what did you learn about yourself from all that time confronting challenge and being alone and dealing with despair?
The thing that was really clear to me, and I don't think it was ever so clear as when I finished this one, and I think it's because how I finished, that I realized that it's not about what you do, like, so it's not about the achievement, but it's about how you do it. Like, so I realized I got real clarity on, like, what this gave me deeply was a clarity on that I got a deep a fulfillment and a peace from an internal peace from doing it, sticking to my, like living to my standards while under the enormous challenges and stress of battling the ocean, battling something that generally I was powerless against. But I wasn't powerless in controlling what was within my control. And then so it was living to those standards when nobody's around to see if you don't, only you, right? So it was that, and then secondly, it was about embodying values that are clearly meaningful and important to me. So it was about living courageously. It was about working hard. It was about being disciplined while under those stresses and strains and the setbacks and the resistance. It was about persevering through that. So it was about having an integrity in how I lived and acted every day when nobody is there to see if you are, right? Nobody's there. Nobody's seeing if I get up at 3:05 in the morning rather than the 3 a.m. Nobody's seeing if I just go, oh, no, give me another 10 minutes today, but I'm seeing that and seeing myself have that discipline and have that determination to just do the work every day and fight through the resistance I was getting and to embody those values that are important to me. So when I got to the end, the achievement really didn't, it's not that it's not important, it is, but it's not truly important. What's really important is that I live to those values and I live to my standards and then nobody else was there to look or judge, but I was there and I did it time and time again. And that's the thing that I got real clarity on.
It's amazing. And then when you came back, I suppose the whole thing of bringing this to life and talking to people about it and speaking, you've just done the tour, you're in the middle of doing the tour at the moment of Ireland. What about developing those skills? Is that something that you had done some of before? Or?
Yeah, like a little bit. It's a common enough offshoot of the adventurer's life. To try and I suppose share or continue to share, at least in my perspective, continue to share the journey and try to relay the things that give you so much, like so the mindsets and the mental processes and the mental resilience strategies to overcome these things, because it just comes back to that, and it comes at its very essence. I'm doing these things to build myself up to be able to approach daily life better. Like my understanding is and my belief is that it makes you more human. You have to, when you spend so much time in these moments of struggle and difficulty and challenge, that it upgrades your consciousness. You become more aware, you get better perspectives, you get more of an understanding of the deep realities of life because you can touch on them, right? True discomfort and true pain. So it gives you so much that way. So it's an extension of trying to share that to people. So if it gives me that in life and it's harmonized my internal world by true difficulty and struggle, well, if I can share that, you never know, it might translate over to somebody else. So that's one component, is the talking about it. But I've also set up a service where I'm putting people through extreme physical and mental challenges, like time frame kind of capped, so of 12 hours or 24 hours. And I've created my own model of like paradigm shifting experiences to give people that experience. So I put them through this, like I call it a crucible experience. So it's like, a crucible is like a forge. So it's like a forging experience. And then we teach them the psychological organization to get through those moments of difficulty and challenge and doubt, because once again it's so translatable to everyday life. A way I put that to people is, if you imagine your life as a pie chart, and like you have this little sliver of the pie chart of like 3% is on expeditions, the other 97% benefits so much from that, what that 3% is. So it's trying to, I've worked for 25 years to figure out all the kind of emotional and psychological side of what I do and the physical side, and I've put it all together. And so it's trying to relay again and share and give back all of that learning, but in a really impactful way by putting people through the experience and then coaching them through it, guiding them through it. So, because all it is how you organize your psychology in those moments of stress. When the stress response hit, that's just being ready to deal with that, and been having the self-awareness to recognize it, and then having the ability to redirect your mind using certain tools like concentration, and how you can change your how you experience that experience just by how you think. And like you can imagine then the transfer into everyday life.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's the thing that really came across with all of the content that you shared while on that row, was that how you considered it. And I think you thought about things deeply and you communicated it in a very genuine, very authentic way. And I think people have really connected with that. And it's fascinating. And we're dying to see what comes next. Thank you so much for coming in and doing this. Feels like a therapy session. But we will share your details so people can follow you and connect with your travels and your work. And thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. It's great. Cheers. Appreciate it.
It was great hearing from Damian. You can find out more about him on Instagram. You can follow him at owld_stock. And if you enjoyed the podcast, please follow us on Instagram or subscribe to our YouTube channel at talentmatters_podcast.